Servus and hello, Matthias Eichler here, and this is Singletrack. Did you get your tickets yet for the Trail Running Film Festival? Check our website at trailfilmfest.com and find your city. Don't see it? More locations will be added throughout the next few weeks, and we will have a virtual viewing week as well. Stay tuned for more information on that. I will be hosting here in Olympia, Washington, and in Vancouver, Washington. So get your tickets, come say hi. It'll be a great night of incredible stories, uplifting our wonderful trail running community. Again, visit trailfilmfest.com for all the details. Speaking of our incredible trail running community, and this week I am chatting with Nick Triolo, Senior Editor for Outside Run and Trail Runner magazine. Nick has been part of our little trail world for many years. He's run some of the most cherished races all over the world and shared many stories of other people's journeys on trails and through mountains. Our conversation ranges from the state of outdoor journalism to tackling some of the more challenging and fascinating issues involving our sport right now. This is Singletrack, episode 268 with Nick Triolo. All right, Nick. Welcome to Singletrack. So incredibly grateful to have you on the show to take some of your busy time for something as weird as audio. You're a writer. You put stuff usually on pen and paper. Do you have like a typewriter? Are you super old school and do this manually, or where's your headspace at?
Yeah, I have a chisel here, but yeah, I have some like stone tablets and some birds that I send out to bring back some notes. Yeah.
I mean, this is really how we're recording this. This is actually smoke signal recording. So Nick,
I'm like somewhere between old fashioned and like tech, somewhere in the middle there. Yeah.
I mean, there is an advantage. Do you have a clicky keyboard? That was always the one thing that I learned from my tech podcast. They are always super fascinated with like very old school, very clickety keyboards. Is that important?
Yeah, I like the sound. There's like a sound. Yeah, it feels like you're doing something. You're going somewhere. In fact, the last keyboard I had, this is a strange aside, but the key that broke, the first letter, which made me just have an existential breakdown, was the letter I. It clicked. It stuck. It clicked like as you say, and it stuck. And I was like, I need to check my ego somewhere at the door because that's a big. I don't know. That's the universe telling me to like get third person here.
There is no I in this keyboard. Okay, that was a dumb part. Okay, so we need to tell folks who you are. Nick Triolo, we met at TRE in the most hilarious fashion, and I choose not to retell the story because this podcast shouldn't go 6 hours long. But you give me your official title for Trail Runner Outside. I want to do it justice, so I'll let you do it.
Yeah, I was hired actually exactly a year ago, just like this week, as Trail Runner Magazine's digital production editor, basically in charge of the digital programming for the magazine. That's since evolved to a sort of hybrid job that is the senior editor for Trail Runner, that and also Outside Run, Outside Magazine, Outside Inc. Outside Online has the website, of course, and on that website they have a running desk, a running header, a running sort of channel, and that channel sort of coalesces, aggregates, features a lot of the running content that is on other titles that include Trail Runner, women's running, triathlete, and then other original content that I acquire and edit and publish on Outside. So I'm sort of I'm now senior editor, which is sort of just doesn't really mean anything other than that it's sort of straddling both worlds. And also just want to be clear, the Trail Runner magazine is no longer in print, and so it's all digital, and so therefore that qualifier in my title means less because now we're all online.
In some respects, I know that you work in a very beleaguered industry, right? Technology has disrupted everything, and the expectations on what you're supposed to be delivering, not just from your bosses, but also from the consumers, is tremendous. And so you find yourself in an incredible challenging spot. And I don't actually want to go there right now because I want to kind of first segue into you as a person a little bit, because obviously if you work for Trail Run Magazine, you are a trail runner too. Give us a little bit of like your personal story. You just wrote an incredible article for your magazine, for your online platform. I don't know, what is the vehicle that we call it now?
Media platform. We still sort of call it magazine,
Right?
and it's yeah.
A magazine is such a positive word, right? We should keep it is in some respects, right? We should keep calling it. But
It's episodic. It's episodic. You know, it's like a package thing. It's an
damn,
object that you can see, that you can take, you can touch, and if digitally, you can still make digital magazines. And we're hoping to make sort of more productions that sort of echo the object a little bit more in the future.
yeah. Well, fantastic. Okay, let's talk about you as the person. Where are you calling from right now?
I'm in Missoula, Montana, Western Montana, and I have lived here for on and off for about 10 years and got my master's degree here, a master's in environmental writing. So sort of environmental science and creative writing back in 2013 through 2016. And then I'm sort of jumping ahead here, but then got a job in publishing on the East Coast with a magazine called Orion, which is an environmental literary magazine. And was their digital editor for 3 years, or sort of 5 years, and then returned. So basically, been in Missoula, Montana for the last 10 years with a little stint in New England. How I got here was a long story, but I'll shorten it and say, grew up in Northern California, played soccer terribly. My soccer coach knew that I played soccer terribly, knew that our team was bad, but he was a marathoner, and his tactic, his strategy was like, okay, we're not going to win with our skills, with our God-given soccer talent, but we can learn how to run, and we can learn how to run these teams down to the ground. And so this dude just like ran us 10-mile hard, tempo runs in like 100 triple-digit heat in the Sierra Hills, the Sierra foothills where I grew up. And so I learned sort of the endurance muscle kind of early on, and then moved to Portland later in life after college, got in the ultra scene in Portland, Oregon. Joe Grant was probably the number one biggest influence in my running career. He's a Black Diamond mountain runner out of Colorado, and still one of my dearest friends, most important people in my life. Joe Grant, Yassine Daboon. Yassine Daboon is also one of my closest friends, and someone who really kind of ushered me into the ultra running scene. Lived adjacent to Forest Park, which is the sort of urban wilderness there in Portland, and just became obsessed with trails, Singletrack. The access was incredible. All the races in the Pacific Northwest. I got into real deep, like all the races, Chuckanut, Hag Lake, Capitol Peak. You're in Olympia, right?
Yeah.
Capitol Peak was like one of my first races.
Nice.
Super grassroots. I paid like $50 cash day of, and just got really into it. Yeah, needed a community that was calibrated on public lands, wild space, pushing one's body, one's mind, altering consciousness. That's always been sort of a common denominator in my life. And yeah, basically got kind of way deep for several years in the Pacific Northwest. Ran Western States at one point, and now and basically moved to Montana for grad school and have continued it ever since. That also sort of dovetails with a growing interest in creative writing and story. I've always sort of been a book nerd and a journaler, and kind of an aspirant travel writer. Maybe that sounds kind of lame, but was always a big sort of intercultural. Like I worked in the intercultural education business for a long time, and was always interested in setting sail and telling stories about travels, external travels, international travels. I found that in ultra running, that's not to sound cheesy, but like there's sort of there's travel in one's mind, there's travel through landscape. So there's a certain level of travel writing that I find sort of compelling in our sport. And those two things have sort of intersected in my life. So now as a 39-year-old working at trail runner and outside and having a sort of competitive career at ultra running, those two things I'm just really celebrating, the kind of intersection of those two things that mean a lot to me. They're meeting me in terms of the internal introspection that is required in something like writing, and then the sort of extroverted endurance, material, corporal experience of running. So that's where I am.
No, that's an amazing place to be. And I think we as a community are lucky to have somebody like you in the position that you're at, because so much of our media, and I guess we're now sort of shifting into this very surface level talking about the industry. It's like, I mean, how do you deal with the fact that everything seems clickbaity? And there is sort of a huge tension that you're willing to straddle, that you're saying we need better writing, not just for us as a community and industry, but also for you personally. You wouldn't write, here are the 10 best things to the 10 best ways to hydrate yourself at Western States, right? I mean, how many clickbait articles can one write, right? I mean, you find yourself then on one side in a beautiful spot because you combine your passion of running and writing, and on the other side in the probably one of the most challenging spots, because how can you get your writing to an audience when I don't know, the algorithms don't value that anymore?
Yeah, I mean it's a big reason why I challenged myself to sort of apply for and jump into this job. I think it was I outside of always really admired outside as a magazine, as a leader in the outdoor media, and I also know that they're really complicated, and they're even more their business model is even more complicated now that they've acquired a bunch of titles um, and without getting too much into the weeds about their business model, I think like philosophically and strategically, there's such a huge case to be made for quality over quantity, for long form, well-examined calculus quality storytelling that is non-binary. It's intersectional. It's complicated. There's no clean answer at the end of your journey through it. It takes months. It's a slow burn, multidimensional, multi-source, peer-reviewed, fact-checked. That takes time. That takes patience. That takes money. And there's also if you flip over, if you like look at how the sausage is made and you look at the analytics of, there's actually, despite what a lot of people think, the mid to long-term retention of readership and return users respond more favorably to long form, like more favorably to quality articles that give them sort of nutrition. And yes, you might get a hit from a listicle, in the tens of thousands of page views, but how does that pay off in the some longer arc of media trust and media relationship building with your readers? Yes, you might get it's sort of like getting a Mountain Dew at AM/PM or something versus like a much more nutritional meal where like I just got a big high off that, off those 50 grams of sugar, and then I'm kind of and then it drops my ass, versus something that is substantial, that I'll definitely come back to because I feel good after having metabolized it. And I was just in a big Google Analytics training today, actually, and a lot of the numbers we're looking at, and actually at the highest level, just to be totally transparent, the highest level of editorial in my employer with Outside, which is it's a leading sort of media outlet, is there's been some changes recently, and I have great faith actually in a lot of the editorial vision and their fidelity to long form and their fidelity to long form stories and paying for those stories, paying writers and creatives to tell those stories and tell them well. I got to be honest and say I didn't maybe have that same I didn't have that same level of faith when I first was onboarded, and I have more like excitement about the next couple years in my role, both at outside as an umbrella, just to get totally specific, and also trail runner, and how that trickles down into the way that we service our community, the way that we, the way that we pay writers that aren't sort of bankrolled by a corporation or by Wahoo or something to like tell the story, but we can actually pay them to tell the story straight, and that's important. That's important to me. That's important to me.
Perhaps you are lucky, and I hope that for you, that perhaps you, because you've only been with Outside for a year, perhaps you've avoided in some respects the weird, confusing last 10 years where we had this Huffington Post model where everything was dumbed down and no writer got paid at all. And then we had the social media model where by now I think almost everyone sort of knows that the numbers that Facebook was telling us were anyway lies all around. This whole like, let's all pivot to video because Facebook said we should pivot to video. Oh, actually the numbers are all cooked, right? Perhaps we are actually at the point that we're coming out of this and are a little bit more real, and we're trusting the raw numbers a little bit less, and we're trusting our gut a little bit more, right? Because this long form storytelling might not show up in the immediate data points, but those are the things that we are connecting with from a brand building, from everything so much longer, right?
Yeah, and I think, yes, absolutely. And another thing I'll say is when I think about something like long form storytelling or short hit videos, whatever, it's important to like ask yourself, like, to not necessarily focus on even the thing that you're consuming, but actually like how it the actual literal thing that you're consuming, but actually how it's making you feel. Like when I sit down to read a long book, in print or online, a long form story, what it requires of me is to like A, focus, B, slow down, C, think about what I'm consuming, of course, but like it's like the much larger, I'm getting kind of philosophical here, but it's a much larger offering than just the object or artifact of the story. It's like it requires all sorts of things, and it's the inverse for other things. Listicles. How does that make you feel? Like how does that how does like TikTok make me feel? Or I'm not against either of those things, but it just begs the question: what does it require of you? What does it reinforce? What does it actually optimize you for? More of that content in the day that you're cruising through the media sphere, and that's your consumption. The more that I sort of engage in content that makes me slow down and think a little bit more complex about issues, and it gives me that space and time to do that, which is hard in this landscape. I realize that it actually is a gift. It's a gift. It's a gift to slow down. It's a gift. I mean, to listen to a whole record, an album from like, I mean, when have you done that? Like people just get singles these days, right? You're just getting singles.
Yeah.
And so when do you slow down enough to like put the record on and listen to it from top to bottom? I think it's a gift when done well. And that requires, trust in the author, trust in the artist, and trust in the platform that's like editing that piece and providing it to you. If that trust is broken, or if it's misplaced, it's a dangerous thing. And the more I'm in this job and in the publishing world, the more I'm learning about how trust is pretty central. Like trust is an essential thing. It can be lost. I think in some ways it has been lost, like in the media sphere of our sport. And I think there's also I think it can be regained, and I think there is trust. There are embers burning.
I mean, the trust part is interesting, and you were saying trusting the author, right? Because what you're suggesting, and that's sort of a question that I understood you correctly, right? That if I'm spending all this time with a piece, right, then it needs to be worth my while, right?
Yes, yeah.
And in some respects, perhaps that's why the self-help sections in bookstores are so big, right? Because so often we just want help, right? We want the quick fix, right? Not just dopamine. We want to feel high, but we also want to we rather read would review the next shoe because we hope that that shoe is going to might make us better or solve our whatever heel chafing problem or whatever, right? Rather than saying, well, how do we step back from that and not worry about our personal improvement on a practical level and think more, how do we actually live? How much do we have to constantly improve, and how much are we actually already who we are?
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
I'm philosophical, right?
I love it. I'm on board with it.
I mean, it
That makes
is,
sense. That makes
and
sense.
it is a fascinating place to be in, and for you to be in this place because you come with his years of history of running. So you're not somebody who's coming sort of new into it. And so I'm now the resident philosopher in this thing, right? You've actually you've done the work by running races all over the world and sort of experience, but you're now in this place where you sort of can express that outward a little bit. And I mean, we talked about beforehand that you're not, and I still want to bring it up. Our sport is changing. Do you see it as well, change is constant, that's why it's changing? Or do you see it more of we are in a tumultuous time? Because some people put up warning flags and think that I don't know, perhaps the outdoors has seen a huge increase in interest, lots of run-of-the-mill brands. Like the outdoors is hip and fashionable right now, right? So there is sort of something happening. Is it the constant that change just is what it is, or is there something more?
It's a huge question. I think that there's like conflicting feelings I have about it. On the one end, there's change is constant, and there's never been a moment where this sport is like just kind of held in two dimensions, and like it's always kind of evolving. It's always responding to precedent, and it's exciting to think that it's growing, it's widening its circle of offering the practice and experience of running on dirt to more and more people. That's exciting to me, just like at the base of it. And with that growing interest and resonance comes all sorts of forces. It comes like there's business interest that sees that growth and wants to beat its best, shiniest $250 pair of shoes. And then there's tech companies that want to, weave biometric fabrics into your t-shirt and like, measure your heart rate at every second of your life. So I guess what I would say is that the wonderful challenge of the growing sport that we're in, the culture that is growing, is that I think, and I mean, I could totally just be getting this wrong, but as the body grows, it actually sort of like this, I don't know if this is even checks out, just forgive me if it doesn't, but as the body of the sport grows, it sort of distances itself from the heart a little bit, right? Like the contours, the perimeter actually grows wider and bigger. And so you got to make sure that, and you got to remember that the heart's still beating, in the core of this thing. And there's a constant sort of game of hygiene and conversation that you have to constantly have with the beating heart of the essence of why we're all doing this. And that doesn't mean to go back to the 70s where it was just better and more simple and some keep ultra running great bullshit. I'm saying there's a constant level, and this is not exclusive to running. This is everything. As we get bigger and more, as I dive deeper into the deep end of the publishing world, I have to constantly check my own ego. I have to check my own skill set. I have to sharpen my tools. I have to make sure that the fundamentals are on point. There's a constant conversation that we have with the root base heartbeat of what we're doing. If it's writing, if it's running, if it's being a good partner, whatever it is, and so I think that if there's anything wonderful about the moment, it's that there's so many doors open to so many people. to introduce themselves to the sport. I mean, I was just in Thailand a couple months ago, and there was 10,000 people at this race. 10,000 people.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
And again, complicated. Like, who has access in Asia to this race? Who's the ability to get there and pay for the flights and pay for the whatever? It's a longer conversation, but nonetheless, like, there's a huge scene of stoke about mountain trail that I immersed myself in. And I bring that up because, and that's a function of a lot of these things. So there's a communication, media, tech, gear, these big companies that are sort of expanding the sport and making their offerings of footwear, technology, enhanced, improvements. That can get us really far from the beating heart of why we're doing this. And it can also offer offer doors for people to enter the sport and enjoy this beautiful thing that we call running. So it's complicated. I think that I don't have an answer for what the future holds, but I just know that there's a big conversation happening and a lot of distance traveling between the heartbeat and where our limbs are right now in the sport. And it's looking kind of ugly in some of the outer reaches, I think, and kind of petty and corporate and whatever. And then there's some really beautiful things happening, beautiful developments. I think there's some really cool races happening. I think there's some really beautiful developments on the equity front. I think there's, other developments in the media landscape. Free Trail is doing a great job. I think there's just some cool moves being made in general that I'm excited about, and that are having these conversations about that, the development of the sport and its relationship to the heart.
I really love, you apologized beforehand, but I think it's a really good metaphor and example of where we are currently at. And perhaps sometimes the conversation gets messy if we ask who has the heart, who is the voice that speaks for the heart. Perhaps we should ask us instead, where can that heart be found? Because it's not with people. I mean, our sport is people, but where do you connect to? You said running on dirt, right? And you simplified it out down so well. Like, where can it be found? And I think these are the stories. If we can continue to highlight the where the heart can be found, then number one, we're removing it from individual people who can be gatekeepers, and we can empower other people to search for that heart and define it for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and they can sort of appraise or take stock of the sport's development on all its fronts. When we see UTMB running its 35 race network, we can ask ourselves, because we have a pretty darn good connection to the heart space. I know it sounds sort of totally like new agey, but like, I have a good rubric now to be like, oh, okay, that's, UTMB's rolling this big network of races out. In some ways it's really positive, in some ways it's really fucked up. And, how am I gauging that? How am I gauging my response to it? Well, I'm engaging it because I have a pretty firm sense of, well, I'm not saying I do. I'm just saying that's the task at hand, is that we have a pretty good sense based on the stories we're telling ourselves, based on the people that we're amplifying, the relation, not even the people, like you said, it's not necessarily even people. It's even deeper than that. Maybe it's the tectonic plates that we all surf on, which is reciprocity. It's humility. It's community, integrity. It's creativity, adaptability, resilience. It's, to the extent that those things mutual benefit, like, if those things are checking out with these developments, then like, hell yeah, let's do it. If those things are in question, if those are the tectonic plates that are not being respected or honored, then I have a problem with that. Does that make sense?
No, it does. No, it does make sense. One of the tectonic plates words that you didn't mention is adventure. I love that our sport allows us micro adventures.
Yes.
Right? I love that we are able to define for ourselves what an adventure is. For someone, it's fulfilling their dream and putting in the work and fulfilling their dream, getting themselves the stones and running around Mont Blanc, right? That is their adventure. For other people, it's signing up for 250 miles through Arizona or whatever, right? I mean, I think for some people, it's showing up on a Saturday morning and running 3 miles through a city park because all day long they're in front of a computer, and that one moment with the feet on the dirt is exactly the kind of the adventure they need, right? And as long as we connect back to these pieces, then then we connect back to the heart.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it.
So
And it's not, and it kind of pushes back against the sort of conventional understanding of something like ultra running, where it's like longer the better, like, the more heroic is the hard rock is the most heroic thing ever because it's the most vert and the most whatever. And that's the sort of public perception of the practice. And that can kind of, I think, on the exterior can sort of go against that, what you just said, of the spirit of the micro adventure, that it is at our disposal, or at our front door. It's right here. It's not in Thailand. It's not in the Alps. I mean, it is in all those
no,
places.
it's
And
definitely in the Alps. For me, it's definitely in the Alps.
definitely in the Alps. Everyone should go to the Alps. I'm going to the Alps in September. So
Jealous.
just to be clear,
Yeah.
the Alps are amazing, and the 3 mile run that I just went on
Yeah.
was also lovely and beautiful, and I saw wonderful things in the last half hour. So yeah.
No, it is. There is sort of an interesting interplay. And I mean, I think there's a very practical criticism that I, as a German growing up with a metric system, obviously struggles with, is that you mentioned a little bit, our over focus on the 100-mile distance. I think there is something where it's historical makes sense, but it is, I don't know, it's such a huge, hairy goal. And if we sort of put out that this is what trail running is, then we're missing a lot of people, because it's also a level of equity. I mean, not that many people can even dedicate that much time into training and gear, money for gear and everything to even achieve that, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so it's good that we find adventures in other forms and break the trail a little bit away from the ultra.
I agree, and I actually, as someone who's at who works a trail runner, and that is watching sort of trends come and go, or flare up or develop, I actually think that the sub ultra distances are actually coming into the forefront a little bit more. I think there's more interest in. I don't know if that's a function of just a little bit more interest in the world championships that went down in Thailand, or there's just a few races that I've found, like, you're seeing this. I guess I'm saying this, but I'm also thinking about the 200-mile, in the development of the 200-mile race sort of apparatus. There's like this super long, sort of almost like fast packing multi-day thing happening, and then there's like this real interest in sub ultra distances, like hard, fast, real athletic, real aerobic efforts that are just heroic. And I think they're both happening. I think I'm sort of fascinated. I mean, you mentioned this piece that I wrote a couple of days ago, and I think it was essentially a piece about taking all of last year and scrambling my hubris for ultra running, and say, like, let's try some other things. I mean, it's that kind of cliche frame of like, I've been sort of salty, crusty for the last 10 years. Let's do something else and find our heart again. But it's sort of true. Like, that's what sort of what happened, where I just sort of needed a little bit of I needed to come at this practice with a different angle, I think. Not because I was like upset about the sport or anything, but just it felt like it needed elevation for me. And it really bore fruit. A lot of the races that I did were sub ultra distances. Some were not. Like, I did a 24-hour race where I went, I think, 104 miles or something. But a lot of the distances were marathons, and stage races, which are mainly like sub ultra distances every day for multiple days, of course. But yeah, I'm, I challenge, encourage, invite everyone who's sort of thought that they have this is their identity as I'm a 50-mile runner. I mean, I was talking to someone the other day where I was like, you know, I was remembering a conversation I had in Portland where this road runner came up to me and he's like, "Hey, what's your distance, your specialty distance?" And I was like, 50 miles, man. I do 50 miles. You know, that's what I do. And I was like, "What do you do, man?" He's like, "I do the 5K." And I was just like, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." Like, you just focus on the 5K, and that, like, how arrogant of me to even suggest that like his specialty is, you know, inferior to 50 miles. 50 miles is equally bonkers. I think, anyway, I bring that up only to say, I'm all about having sort of preference to a distance and a mindset and a body, how your body feels in particular distances. Like my supervisor, boss, and colleague Zoe Rome at Trail Runner, like, loves the 100-mile distance. That's her thing, and I really honor that. And I just kind of feel like it's really fun to change things up. It's fun to change things up, to get out of your own box, and also to meet other people. I mean, of course, like, meet other people who are focusing on these things and part of these communities. So
the changing up part is super fascinating, and I want to talk about that. But I also want to talk about sort of finding your distance and being okay with not going always the full big distance. I think it creates longevity for us, right? Our ability. There are a lot of people in the road running world who sort of show up. Perhaps it's a midlife crisis thing, and they say, "Okay, I want to run a marathon," right? And then they train 2 years, run their marathon, get that experience of running through a city out of their systems, and then they're done, and it's fine. I'm not criticizing this, but I think if you're focusing over too much, I was like, I have to have this buckle, then, well, perhaps we're burning out too fast. I think it's good to either not just find your distance, but also to change things up. So let's talk about it. You wrote for Trail Runner magazine, and we're linking it in the show notes, an article called "Let's Get Promiscuous with Our Running," just published. So you, as you already said, you needed a year where you just wanted to try different things, where you wanted to sort of break out. Let's talk briefly. What did the previous years for you look like?
Well,
What
the previous
got you in
years,
that rut, if you will?
yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say a rut, but I would say a sort of um, I think there was, like, the direction was uncertain. Like, what direction was this practice going in for me? I think that, like, there was, without getting too autobiographical, it was like basically 5 years of racing 5 to 8 ultras a year, like full on all year round. 50Ks to 100 milers basically. And then I think that kind of blew up. That was like a little bit too much. That was too much for me. Just my body and I have a sort of allergy to putting too many eggs in one basket. Like, in my entire life, I feel like I saw myself getting really sort of singular, and, like, I started losing, like, dimensionality in my life. I sort of, like, all the things were in the basket of these distances and that sort of the running world. And so I sort of backed up on that, and I sort of took a breather. And I think that coincided with going to grad school. And
Please don't tell me that your breather was you started gravel bike riding.
I did not start gravel bike riding.
Because I think everybody else who needed a breather, especially during COVID, got themselves a gravel bike, right?
I did not get a gravel bike. I did not do that. Nothing against gravel bikes, but
No.
yeah, I saw that development rally. The gravel as a adjective, or like a qualifier for. I mean, there's gravel shoes. There's a whole. I just, like, edited a piece on, like, the development of gravel running, which is like, what even is that? Anyway, so
sorry, I derailed you.
No, it's good. It's good. It was like a chunk of taking it real seriously, a chunk of, like, backing up and being like, wow, that was a lot. That was a lot. And then and then doing this thing that I know people do where you have this history of some, of running and running competitively, and then the sort of expectation that you still have that as you're A, getting older, B, having backed up from it for a bit, not training as much or as obsessively as you once did, but having this sort of chip on your shoulder that you're deserving of results that are better than what you're getting. And so there was this strange conversation I was having with my own body and my own relationship to the sport, between sort of no longer really being competitive, but also not wanting to just be recreational in the sport either, and also dipping into my mid 30s and just sort of like moving forward with other interests and skill sets. And anyway, so I think it kind of came up to that ceiling of like, okay, so you've done that, you've sort of run through this sort of like kind of conflicted relationship you have with your competitive self and your love for the sport, and how do you sort of square that circle? And it came to the head of, let's try a couple things. Let's like come at this beautiful practice a little bit from a different angle and see what happens. And now in 2023, after having done these things, the 24-hour race, the last person standing race, the Boston Marathon, the international race, I think I came to the conclusion that like I want to definitely immerse myself in the formats that really move me, and I think that I do sort of probably revert back to trail and mountain, and the thing that really moved me the most was sharing the races with other people, and not being sort of not limiting myself in format or either trail or road, but seeing it as a far bigger practice than just running trails for 2 to 20 hours. Every time I step out now, it's like it's no longer just I am a trail runner and I do this, but it's I want to say that it's a little bit more aquaphoric, or it's like it feels a little bit bigger to me now than it once did, and that was a success for me.
So yeah, so you stretched yourself, you tried a whole bunch of different things. Give us a couple snapshots. What was one of the most surprising experience that you made in that year of running different? I mean, it's evil to say one of the most. I mean, of course you made lots of ones. So give us one where you're like,
the two that really stand out for me were the last person standing race, which is sort of the Barkley, the Barkley or the Biggs Ultra, not Barkley, the Biggs Ultra sort of backyard race, sort of format, and the 24-hour race. The 24-hour race, actually, Joe Grant, who I mentioned earlier in this podcast, did the across the years 24-hour race in Phoenix when we were buddies and we were running a lot together. He like went to this crazy race in Phoenix and he ran 130 plus miles. I think he won it or he got second or something. And I was like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. So he planted the seed, a long time ago for me to even like know what that was. And so it was kind of a whole full circle to come and like choose to do that. But that was a really wild experience where you basically run, if for those of you that aren't familiar with the 24-hour timed race, you basically, this format was you were basically running a 1 mile circuit for 24 hours. The gun goes off at 9 a.m. and you have until 9 a.m. the next day to run as many effing laps as you possibly can. And every 4 hours they sound off an alarm and you start going the other way. So as to not like burn out your right hip or your left hip because you're doing rights and rights and rights. That was surprisingly really interesting. And it was surprisingly not as hard as I thought it was going to be. I actually, the fact that you had no external stimulation or any big mountain ranges to sort of like, geek out on, you just kind of had your own mind to kind of deal with, And I sort of felt like what I really wanted to do was like just dumb down and like kind of flop around like a dumb animal around and around. And that sounded really interesting to me. I wanted to like put my intellect aside for a second and put any sort of hanging my hat on the beauty of this or that. I mean, it was in this kind of like terrible. It's like where I think the Dodgers are spring training grounds, like this Camelback Ranch. It's just kind of like this manufactured ballpark basically that you just run around and it's like nothing special. And I found that sort of nice, actually. I mean, most people would just be like, that's the worst thing. That sounds terrible. And I actually found it nice to just like, all I had was my own mind to deal with. And I didn't have any other sort of risk factors that I had to deal with, or terrain that was like, I didn't account for. Like, you just knew the terrain, like every step you just knew so well because you saw it 104 times, So that was pretty cool. And then that was the last one. So backing up to the very first of 5 events was the last person standing. And I was basically running 4 miles on the hour every hour until you can't anymore. And both these formats are just wild and totally unconventional. And I'm not sure if I'll do either ever again in my life, but they were surprisingly really fun because they required a much different mindset. And you had these like, you didn't have to carry anything. So there's like very little gear that you needed. And so because there wasn't very little asked of you, you could really focus on the sort of quality of mind as you move through these things. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling. I think those two were really surprising, probably the biggest stretches. And then the Boston Marathon was kind of a trip just because of the history. It was just kind of a lot. I got COVID, which was terrible, but and then the stage race is probably the most like enjoyable of all of them. The stage race was just like, I mean, 8 days in the Alps doing what you love with a friend and meeting a big international cohort was phenomenal. And then Thailand, that was the international race, I think number 4 on the 5 races. And that was just, being able to fly to a different sort of region of the world and experience the how amazing our sport is and how many lives it's touching, and being part of that was something that I hadn't really experienced that far from home.
Yeah. I mean, it is incredible, diverse set of races, and I don't know, perhaps it's nice for you. I mean, if you would be Courtney Dahlwater, right? I mean, I don't know if she sees the pressure that's on her, but if she would select races like that, right, there would be like 400 think pieces being written on Twitter about what does that mean for her and the sport and the future and everything, right? And you sort of have the ability to just kind of go out and change up what you're doing and do something a little bit different and enjoy it for yourself, right? Because I think, the way you describe, especially the 24-hour race, so much of our mountain races require all this preparation, and we really need to prepare ourselves, which in many ways is fascinating. That's why we do it, right? We like the prep as much, not just the training, but also the like, okay, there's this 5,000 foot climb and then there's this 2,000 foot climb. We need to kind of prepare ourselves for that. But with a race where it's just the same mile loop, you can sort of strip all of that away, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, the last thing I'll say, I mean, not to like tie these two passions of mine to like, not to like shoehorn this in here, but as a aspiring writer, as a writer myself, one of my greatest mentors, Christopher Merrill, he runs the international writing program in Iowa, and he basically travels. He calls himself like a literary diplomat. He travels around the world. I think Obama put him on his humanities council. He's like an amazing person, one of the most amazing people I know in the literary scene. But he told me, he's like, Nick, like, in America, every writer just thinks that they're like, I do nonfiction. That's all I do. I just write. I'm a journalist. I don't deal with like fiction. I don't do screenplays. I don't, I'm in this lane and this lane only. He's like, no. The rest of the world, like you meet a Latvian writer and they're doing like they're screenwriting. They're doing poetry. They're writing songs. Yes, maybe they have a vocation that's probably their primary, but they don't think of their craft as so narrowly. And I think he's like, in the States, we have this like really narrow, and he's like, I don't know if it's a function of school. I don't know how we're indoctrinated into this mindset that we're just this thing and that's it. And we have to focus on that. It's like super specialized. But I'm constantly thinking about ways to widen my circles of, yes, this is my preference. My body says that I want to be on trails and mountains more than on road. I think that's true for me personally. Mm-hmm. I'm just using that as an example where I still don't want to just like chuck road out the window. I don't want to, because then that makes me when I interview an elite road marathoner, like I have a dear friend, Peter Bromka, who's a big road marathoner. I think because I've sort of widened my circles of understanding what running is, we've been able to connect on a more intimate level as fellow foot travelers, because I've sort of widened my own circle of humility around what running is for me. I've been able to learn a little bit more about the road marathon scene, the culture there. And because of that, I feel like I can connect with him more, and we have a better friendship because I'm not just like, dude, you're crazy, you're a marathoner. I'm a mountain man. Sorry, can't talk to you. That just seems silly to me. So, I think in my work as an editor and a writer and a runner, one of my biggest sort of North Stars is to like push back against any sort of narrow mindedness around identifying too narrowly at the expense of widening your relational circle.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that's probably a sign of maturity. We probably, in our 20s, we're forced through job, career to narrow ourselves down, specialize ourselves, or really figure out what we are. And most of the people define who they are by saying what they are not, and border themselves off from everything in order to sort of find their niche. I've got teenagers who are going through this process right now, who very, very narrowly finding sort of their path, right? But as you get older, you realize that there are actually some other things that even if they don't become your thing, right? You don't have to like second guess and throw your entire history out the window, but sometimes sort of experience something new does widen your horizon, makes you more well-rounded and appreciate more the other people too, right? Not just yourself, right?
Yeah. I think it's important. I think the last thing I'll say about that is like, I don't know if this checks out, but like the extent to which if you go to a hypothetical a dinner party, and everyone around the table is talking about all sorts of different topics, to the extent that I can have a chat with you, stranger, across the table, and you're telling me about an experience you're having, and I can connect with you on that in some way because I have some affiliation because I've widened my circles of curiosity, which I guess curiosity is, if there's one word around that, this piece that we keep talking about, it's like the curiosity is actually a function of, or it's connected to its joy, sure, and also connectivity to other people with other experiences and other sort of working definitions of identity, and I guess that's I think I said in the piece, some sort of working definition, dynamic definition of compassion, which is you're being open to the lives of others. You're seeing the lives of others through a lens that got a little bit wider. And I think through something as playful as running, you can do that. And then you can do that in all sorts of ways and vocations, of course. But I always want to go to a dinner party and be able to be like, yeah, like I did listen to that album. It's like it's not my like music of choice, but like I gave it a shot. I listened to that sort of esoteric jazz, and let's talk about it, because I have some shared language. I have like a little bit of, I'm interested in it, and I'm interested in hearing what you have to say about it, because you're really passionate about that, and I have some semblance of shared language that we can start the conversation anyway.
Yeah, it comes, I think. Our fear of the other comes from a lack of confidence, right, in ourselves. We feel like if we're too broad, then we're nothing, then we don't define ourselves. And so I think we try to narrow ourselves down. And I don't know, we just don't really move across our horizon anymore. In German we say look above the rim of your own plate of food, right? So you sort of, that's that expanding your horizon. You have your plate of food that you focus on, that's what nourishes you, but there is more to that, right? There is a life beyond that immediate rim of your plate. One thing that
Yeah.
really helps with that is moving to another country. Then you
Mm.
really get forced into all sorts of, wait, what? There's something else out there than my own plate.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if this is again, I don't know if this is a tenuous connection here, but just full circle back to the future of trail running, or we have a lot of players that are wanting to be visible and wanting to be influential in the game right now. Big races, big corporations, small, values forward races, race directors that, I was on a call the other day with a race director from Hidalgo, like from Mexico, basically, and he was like sort of noticing UTMB's influence in his country. He race directs smaller races, wants to keep them small, wants to keep them core, wants them all to have an ethical, environmental sort of backbone. And it was really cool to hear him, as someone from a different country, but same practice of running, talk about that tension that he feels. And I think at the end it was like, yeah, they can all we can all be part of the party in some ways. And I think that there's room for all of these models to sort of interact with each other. I don't think that one force is more diabolical than the other, or I think that it's important for us to sort of include them all and see what we gravitate towards. I don't think it's as easy as saying like the year 2023, this particular choice of race or brand is just like totally destroying the culture, or it's all about grassroots, or it's all about multinational, corporate running interests. I think that all I think those definitions can live in concert with each other. I think those, and I guess that's sort of harking back to this curiosity piece of like, I'm I'm curious how those differing forces can really work in concert to help each other out, not necessarily be in conflict with each other.
Yeah.
Um, not to sound like Dr. Phil here or something, but I'm curious about how they can play in the same sandbox.
You know, perhaps it comes down to that we're so afraid that there isn't enough for everyone that we always feel like it's one or the other. But we are not a mall with a limited number of stalls. Did we trails and permits, like Ironman is not going to come around and going to be able to buy up every permit for every trail race and on every trail in every public lands. It's impossible. There is no mechanism for them. And so therefore that fear of them taking over, I think, is unfounded, because there is just way too much opportunity for the local community to build the races that they want to. And Ironman is currently not operating on a model that they're underpricing everything and making these races somehow free, that you can't operate as an individual, right? So I think some of these market forces that we are sort of have grown used to working in other areas, I don't think that they are actually on a very practical level, right? If it were talking like actually practical, I don't think they really operate on a trail running basis. I don't think that my local city park permitting department is going to take preferential treatment of a multinational corporation over somebody who lives in their community and actually has a local business license, right?
Mm-hmm. 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 I would have to agree. I would have to. I hope that's true.
Yeah. No, I think there's way too many places where we can run races, and even iconic locations have proven themselves to be able to hold multiple races throughout the year without too much of competition, right? That I think it works. So, speaking of races, what's on your calendar for 2023?
Gosh, there's there's a few things well, I'm definitely going back to the Transalpine Run, which is a stage race that was part of that article and part of that last year of experimental running. Going back there in September and going to run that. I'm so excited.
Is that with a team? Are you two people or? Yeah.
Yes. And that's so this year, I think this is the first year that they've offered a solo option, but I don't want to discourage the solo option, but if that's what you're into, the team thing is such an interesting, beautiful thing.
If you have somebody who runs your same pace, like I have somebody who I love running with, but he's so much faster than me that I would feel really bad.
It really is important to choose wisely. It really is on so many levels, fitness, just interpersonal. You're in another country, so there's all sorts of intercultural sort of mannerisms. My partner Jason was just so perfect on pretty much all the levels, miraculously. He's super fit. He's from New England, dear friend from my time in Massachusetts. I'd done the race before, so he kind of knew how the mechanics of it worked. Super well traveled, so he's just very sort of not your like brusque American sort of piling through the Alps asking for this and that.
Where's the ice in the water?
Yeah. So he was totally respectful on all the levels, very clear, direct communicator. We checked out with our goals ahead of time. And so that was great. I'm doing that. I have this, that's the only race that I'm probably like 100% signed up for in this year. I do have a really cool development that I think I hinted at earlier in this talk, but 10 years ago, I put together this run that actually ran across the Baja Peninsula in a day. It was a 70-mile crossing. I actually made a short film about it. It was in 2013, April. And so this is 10 years later, 2023. There are actually some Mexicans, race director who I mentioned earlier is actually organizing a race that's kind of traversing the peninsula again. Not because of anything I did necessarily, but he's a race director from mainland Mexico and just sees this as a really cool route. And so he's actually he did like a pilot race this last year, and he's doing pretty much the first like established race this November where it's a 50-mile crossing of the peninsula, and it looks amazing. And I've done it again. I did it 10 years ago, and he invited me to come down and do it with him and be part of that race in November. So I'm pretty much a yes for that, which is in November. So September, stage race, November, running across Baja, and then maybe some shorter races in the Pacific Northwest, depending on availability. The Tiger Claw, the Ginger Runners, Ethan Newberry's race. I really want to get up there at some point. And then the what's the race in Washington? Daybreak's race. Oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on the race.
Backcountry Rise.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Backcountry Rise is absolutely one that I want to run at some point, but I don't know if my schedule is going to help me out with that.
Nice. That's good. And it means you have like the whole spring time to write articles about the Trail Running Film Festival.
Exactly. I'm so excited for that.
You see how I segued that? We need to finish off quickly talking about the Trail Running Film Festival. This is like, for me, I mean, I've been like completely immersed with that to the point that I've like missed several weeks of podcast posting because of it. So now that I'm picking up the podcast again, I have to make sure that every podcast talks about the film festival. So I have still no location in Montana. It's very, very sad. Help us out.
You'd be happy to know. I just emailed the main people that move and shake here in the Missoula running scene, and I emailed them with all the information.
Nice.
And they're marinating in that email right now as we speak.
Very good.
Let's see what happens. I'm gonna plug you in this film festival and saying that think about how it feels to sit with other runners and watch inspiring content on a screen, and then get on the trails. Think about how it makes you feel to congregate, to be with people that you love, watching the thing that you love. And it's got all the ingredients of all the things we talked about as far as, think about not just the screen and the thing that you're watching, but think about how you're feeling in the moment and that's how, the Trail Film Festival that I've been to in the past has like delivered all those goody those feelings of feeling connected to something bigger than me and watching good art and story on the screen. It's an important thing. I'm so glad that it's back. I'm so glad that you're the person that's actually running it. As soon as I met you, I was just so excited that you're making this happen. So
I appreciate it. Thank you. It's been an absolute crazy ride, sort of taking on a project previously. I love doing this kind of project management, but I've always done my own projects, and there's a limited reach if you start off from something completely from scratch, right? And to sort of make my first attempt in sort of reaching out and realizing how powerful the brand is, if you will, how much it resonates with people, and realize how much bigger this already is than what I'm sort of just a caretaker. I'm sort of the facilitator to make sure that it continues, right? You're sure I built the spreadsheets and stuff, but really the community is there. The community, as you're saying, wants to gather, wants to congregate and be inspired. And we have such a unique opportunity in showing films that aren't just the sponsored content from the big brands. And so I think that we can be a little bit, I said earlier, the heart is not the who, it is the where, right? And I hope the heart can be found at this film festival. I'm not saying I'm the one who holds the heart, right? In fact, I'm not even a filmmaker, right? I mean, I am sort of, I'm somebody who turns the lights on. It's the filmmakers who tell these stories, find these people, and to be able to sort of bring this all together is a huge honor.
You're tending the heart, and where that heart lives, it's not in the person. It's obviously bigger than that. But I think that what you're doing, what the Trail Film Festival sort of stands for, and its mission is tending to the heart, the heart, which is the hearth, which is the fire, which is the central sort of life force of what we're doing here. And I think that the import of something like the Trail Film Festival, and in my lane, like examined, artful, compelling, evocative storytelling is tending to the heart also.
Yeah.
So
no, absolutely.
Yep. That's why I am where I am, I think.
Nick, that's where you are. Absolutely. I think you playing a very important role in that on your side. If people want to connect with you, I don't know, I used to say, do you have a Twitter account? But I mean, Twitter is sort of dead now, so people don't do Twitter. Do you have a Mastodon account? Is that why? Have you moved to Mastodon already? Where do people connect with you? Where do you?
I'm not on Mastodon. I did drop my Twitter recently. I wasn't even like very active on Twitter. I think I have a website, Nicholas Triolo. It's relegated to my mother when she's angry at me, but that's what it's called, nicholastriolo.net. And I guess Instagram and Facebook now. Maybe Mastodon in the future, but maybe in a year's time, someone will listen to this and I'll very much be on Mastodon. But right now, no.
Okay.
I think the best place to find, and also if you go to trailrunnermag.com, you can find my work there. I probably post like monthly pieces of my own, but I'm editing and acquiring and editing a lot of work on there too. But you can find most of my like the bylines, the writing on my website.
Fantastic. Well, Nick, thank you so much for your time. We'll link all of that in the show notes so people can easily click on it and not have to try to spell it out. I very, very much appreciate you giving me so much of your time. Thanks for coming on Singletrack.
Thank you. I appreciate you too. Thanks a lot.